Simultaneously at Gestapo's natatorium, Emma, Mila, and 2 other women stand side by side. They frighteningly weep as they are about to be shot to death one by one. Lieutenant Klaus relentlessly attacks 2 other women, leaving Emma and Mila alive. The movie begins at night when a middle-aged Jewish man tells her daughter, Elsbeth, a bedtime story. Elsbeth giggles with her parents as they hardly kiss her cheeks before she sleeps. Afterward, she curiously asks her parents why the Germans loathe them. Startled, her parents pause for a while, then optimistically reassures her they'll be safe. Finally, they bid goodnight and leave. Minutes later, a loud gunshot and screaming across Elsbeth's room nervously surprises her. As she slowly goes downstairs, she fearingly sees her mother getting assassinated by Nazi soldiers. Her father screamingly weeps, then gets mercilessly assassinated after. One evening in Congresshalle after the Allied victory, General George Patton confidently spoke to thousands of soldiers about an incredible story of a man named Marcel Marceau. Sometime in France, the beginning of Marcel's story unfolds. Marcel, performing an impression of Charlie Chaplin, is passionately acting on stage in a brothel. Audiences are minding their own businesses as Marcel continues to entertain them. As he ends his act, he is surprised by Charles's arrival, his father. Charles aggressively presses Marcel against the wall outside the brothel as he finds out about his acting job. Marcel defends his work as it has been his dream for a long time. Charles mutely pauses and briefly informs him of their butcher work tomorrow. The following day in Boucherie Mangles, George, Charles's nephew, arrives to persuade Marcel to work as an entertainer for Jewish orphans. Marcel resistingly makes many excuses when suddenly, he utters an offensive statement to make George dismayed and taken aback. Nevertheless, he forcibly accepts the offer as a form of apology. One morning, 123 Jewish orphans whose parents were killed by the Nazis somberly arrive in France's border. Alain, a guard on the French-German wall, is dismayed as he sees his arrogant brother Marcel waiting for the Jewish orphans. He presumably believes Marcel will only make things difficult for the other workers. In response, George assures Alain to send Marcel home if he doesn't do his job right. Sometime later, in a French Jewish humanitarian organization's castle, the Jewish orphans are tasked to reside there. They become uncontrollably exuberant as they gather in their vast bunk room. George and the other workers cannot calm them. Confused, Marcel sits on the side of the room and contemplates. Then, he makes hand gestures to entertain the distressed Jewish orphans. Finally, he lights a match, places it in a bagel, and mimes. Everyone laughs. Later on, he catches the attention of all the people in the room. He continues acting, making everyone smile, including Emma, the love of his life. Sometime later, at Charles's residence, Marcel, in a woman's undergarment, concentratedly paints on his room wall. Suddenly, Charles arrives to ask him questions again about his passion. Marcel returns the question to him and leaves afterward. At a dinner table, Charles confidently believes Hitler, dictator of Germany, cannot invade France. However, his wife and children think they should prepare themselves for the possible worst scenarios in the future, even if that means they have to leave France. A year later, Marcel, together with Alain, arrives at the French Jewish humanitarian organization's castle. Jewish orphans cheerily welcome them. Afterward, Alain alertly informs George and the other workers to move the Jewish orphans to the south of France as it is dangerous to gather them all in the castle. George is skeptical and hesitant to do so until he is enlightened about the possible worst scenarios to come. One morning sometime later, the Jewish orphans are having their survival training in the castle. They silently hide on top of big trees while Emma and Marcel act as Nazi officers to scare them. Joseph, one of the orphans, suddenly laughs as he sees Marcel's hilarious acting. Subsequently, Alain calmly asks him to come down and enlightens him to take the training seriously as he can use it for future purposes. Sometime later, Marcel and the other workers gather to listen to a tombstone radio announcement. The announcement contains the mandate evacuation of citizens in the next 10 days. Distressed, they immediately formulate a plan to evacuate the Jewish orphans. After that, Emma, alone outside the castle, is having deep thoughts regarding the announcement when suddenly, Marcel arrives to give her a rose to make her happy. One morning, the Jewish orphan boys receive their haircuts while George gives them a meaningful and motivational speech on stage. Afterward, Marcel blows on the horn to create sound to lead the chanting Jewish orphan on their journey. Then, carrying all their belongings, they depart to the south. Sometime in the south of France, the 123 Jewish orphans are spread to smaller groups to minimize their visibility to Nazis. Some are sent to churches, schools, and other orphanages. However, the remaining orphans continue to increase in numbers as George and the other workers expect more of them to arrive. Meanwhile, Marcel carefully inscribes lines and letters on his passport to change his name. Emma and Alain chatter near him, tackling the lion resistance group they aim to participate in. On the other hand, Marcel disagrees as he prefers gradualism over revolt. However, Alain remains to persuade him to join the resistance. Later on, they applaud his passport fraudulency skills. Sometime in Berlin, Germany, Lieutenant Klaus Barbie, Nazi Gestapo chief, enters a pub with men loudly and cheerfully chanting. Sitting down, he clinks his wine glass to catch everyone's attention. Bothered by the rumors, he frustratingly bursts out to them as he finds out some Nazis are Jews and homosexuals. The men begin to shout, "Heil Hitler," to show loyalty to their leader. However, it only triggers Lieutenant Klaus more. Finally, in wrath, he forcefully beats a man to death in front of him. One evening, Marcel and Emma emotionally drop Elsbeth to a church where she will stay. A priest welcomes her. As they bid farewell, Emma unexpectedly sees Nazi officers from afar. She immediately kisses Marcel when the Nazi officers approach them. The officers suspiciously ask for their passports and warn them to not roam late at night next time. Meanwhile, inside a church bunk room, Elsbeth quietly breaks a loaf in two. She finds her newly forged passport in it with her new name given by Marcel himself. She smiles. As Marcel and Emma return to their hideout, Marcel curiously asks Alain how to take part in the resistance group in Lyon. Confused, Alain asks for his sudden change of mind. In response, Marcel confidently wants to fight back the enemies knowing the risk of doing so. Consequently, Alain proudly hugs him for his change of heart. He believes Marcel is no longer an arrogant person. Afterward, Alain tells him to ask for their father's permission. Later that night, in a theater room, Marcel confusingly sees his father performing an opera on stage. He emotionally waits outside to confront him. While Charles exits the theater room, he surprisingly sees his son. As Marcel discovers his job, Charles immediately confesses the truth of having a passion for being an entertainer like him. Marcel wonders why his father forbids him from pursuing his acting ambitions. In response, Charles simply doesn't want him to go hungry because most artists don't make enough money to support themselves. Fair enough, Marcel now has a better understanding of him, which deepens their relationship as father and son. Later, Marcel asks Charles permission to join the Lion resistance with Alain. Instantly, Charles permits him and gives him his blessings. After a while in Lyon's train station, Marcel, Mila, Emma, and Alain arrive. They separately walk to avoid suspicions when suddenly, a Nazi officer takes hold of Alain. Subsequently, Marcel devises a plan to help Alain escape. Marcel burns a Nazi officer alive to cause an uproar. Alain manages to flee the vehicle he is forced to enter. As Lyon's train station crowd runs in panic, Mila and Emma, inside a moving vehicle, scream to call on Marcel and Alain's names. They all finally escape the station. Minutes later, they arrive at Lyon's resistance hideout. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Klaus views random people lining up downstairs in Gestapo headquarters. He learns they're giving out information about the resistance groups in exchange for rewards. In the interval, Dominique, an upper hand in Lyon's resistance group, dominantly requests Marcel for quickly forged passports of 20 French fighters in an hour. Pressured, Marcel has no other choice but to follow. In a short while, Dominique and other group members leave together with Marcel to secretly welcome the fighters from Britain. Marcel quickly works on the passport in their vehicle. After a while, in a Gestapo natatorium, members of another resistance group stand side by side, waiting for their death. Finally, Lieutenant Klaus arrives and relentlessly shoots them one by one. After some time in Lyon's resistance hideout, Emma catches a glimpse of Mila making love with Alain after she finishes taking a bath. When Mila returns to sleep, Emma is still wide awake and happily surprised by Mila's secret love story. As they whisperingly converse, a loud continuous gun sound approaches their hideout. They basically try to escape, but the Nazis manage to capture them. Meanwhile, Alain, from afar, unexpectedly sees Mila and Emma frighteningly enter a Nazi vehicle together with other members of Lion's resistance group. He swiftly flees the scene to meet Marcel and the others. In the interval, Dominique receives a signal of the fighters approaching. The fighters arrive at their location on a parachute and swiftly leave with them in their vehicle. Alain, almost hit by Dominique's moving vehicle, can track and stop them in time. He immediately informs them of the current situation in their hideout. Simultaneously at Gestapo's natatorium, Emma, Mila, and 2 other women stand side by side. They frighteningly weep as they are about to be shot to death one by one. Lieutenant Klaus relentlessly attacks 2 other women, leaving Emma and Mila alive. As Lieutenant Klaus approaches the natatorium, he forcibly drags on Emma. At the same time, Mila stays and weepingly begs him not to take her. Chained, Emma maintains her composure while Lieutenant Klaus threatens her. Lieutenant Klaus briefly leaves to drag on Mila next. Afterward, he mercilessly tortures Mila to death while extracting information from Emma about Lion's resistance group. Not long after, Emma is set free from the Gestapo's headquarters. A Nazi officer places a war axe pin on the left side of her chest to serve as an award for her collaboration with them. Traumatizingly zoning out, Emma despairingly walks until she reaches Lion's train station. Then, attempting suicide, she waits for a moving train to come. Luckily, Marcel hastily runs to save her. One sorrowful morning, Alain depressingly learns Mila is assassinated. Meanwhile, Emma is preparing to exact revenge on the Nazis, particularly Lieutenant Klaus. Marcel, on the other hand, convinces her to act in support of the Jewish orphans rather than engage in a losing battle. Emma remains skeptical until Marcel enlightens her about the bright future of the orphans outside the Nazi borders. Emma agrees to his plan later on. Sometime later at night in the south, Marcel meets with George and the other workers in their former hideout. Then, Marcel plans to take a small group of Jewish orphans to travel on a snowy hill to reach Switzerland, where they can find safety. Later, he proceeds to the church where Elsbeth is, invitingly taking her with him, including the other orphans. After some time, the small group of Jewish orphans dressed up as scouts departs by train together with Emma, Alain, and Marcel. George shed tears as the orphans bid their farewells. Alain, on the other hand, worriedly tells his father to leave Europe as well. Sometime later, Charles is invited to a Nazi building to have a meeting for a visa for foreign Jews. However, the Nazis trick him only to hold him captive, including the other Jews in the building. Meanwhile, Elsbeth approaches Emma on the train to comfort her for her loss. Minutes later, Emma fearingly sees Lieutenant Klaus outside the window when the train stops at Lyon Station. She hastily hides as Lieutenant Klaus enters and surveys the train car. Swiftly, the Jewish orphans begin singing. As they stop, Lieutenant Klaus asks for their passports, which Marcel has forged in advance. The orphans continue singing and entertaining the lieutenant. Later on, Lieutenant Klaus suspiciously inspects Marcel's body and belongings. He then asks him a personal question and sets him free once satisfied with his response. Lieutenant Klaus leaves afterward, unable to notice Emma's existence on the train. Sometime later, in Montreal, 6 miles away from the Swiss border, Marcel and the others travel through a snowy hill. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Klaus shoutingly argues with his wife in their room in Gestapo headquarters when suddenly, a Nazi officer knocks on their door. As Lieutenant Klaus opens the door, the Nazi officer immediately notifies him of his discovery of their tortured priest. Consequently, Lieutenant Klaus learns where the Jewish orphans he met a while ago are heading to. He commands the Nazi officer to have the Gestapo squad equipped to depart with him. As Marcel and the others take a short break on the snowy hill, the Nazi soldiers arrive to search for them. Swiftly, they hide atop the trees, the same as in their previous training. Without making any unnecessary noise, they manage to trick the Nazis. They silently go down the tree one by one and flee the scene. Finally, however, Lieutenant Klaus manages to notice their movements and screams to halt them. Subsequently, Marcel and the others continue to hastily run until they reach a cliff. Marcel screamingly tells the others to jump as the Nazi soldiers hastily approach them. However, Emma gets shot in her back by Lieutenant Klaus before she can jump and escape. Later on, Marcel and the others manage to survive. On the other hand, Emma is breathing heavily as she awaits her death. Marcel screams her name multiple times until she no longer lives. Her eyes are wide open. Soon after, as Marcel and the others are resting in the snow, a hunter approaches them. The hunter politely asks if they need help. Later, Marcel and the others learn that they escaped France and managed to reach the border of Switzerland. The Jewish orphans rejoice out of relief. The movie ends before the beginning, where General Patton tells Marcel's story to thousands of soldiers. He proudly introduces his accomplishments and heroism of Marcel. Marcel, in a mime outfit, Marcel is about to make his first public performance to entertain soldiers. The soldiers enjoy his phenomenal performance.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this to help the channel out. Have a nice day.